I didn't believe in ghosts, UFOs, or anything supernatural. I spent most of my career chasing down so-called paranormal phenomena and explaining them with cold, hard facts. That was my job, turning superstition into science, myths into measurable data. The Brown Mountain Lights? They were just another mystery waiting for a rational explanation. That's what I told myself as I drove my RV up the winding roads of Pisgah National Forest. The thick trees closed in on either side. The air was crisp and autumn leaves scattered across the path. There was a quiet stillness that made the world feel far away. I should have felt calm, excited even, but as the sun began to sink behind the distant ridges, leaving the forest bathed in shadow, I felt something else. Tension. Shaking it off, I parked the RV at the remote campsite I'd scouted. This was supposed to be a solo trip, a few days to get up close and personal with the Brown Mountain Lights, interview locals, take readings, and prove once and for all that the lights were nothing more than atmospheric conditions or optical illusions. I had all the gear I'd need: high-resolution cameras, thermal scanners, EMF detectors, the works. I wasn't expecting to find anything supernatural, just an anomaly. And anomalies had explanations. But the moment I stepped out of the RV, a chill ran through me. The trees rustled softly, as if whispering some secret I wasn't meant to hear. Focus, I muttered to myself, dragging my gear out and setting up the cameras, angling them toward Brown Mountain Ridge. I had a perfect view of the ridge from my campsite, miles away but clear in the distance. That's where the lights were supposed to appear. By the time I was fully settled in, I was sitting outside the RV, bundled in a jacket, sipping coffee, and staring out into the dark, waiting. The forest was eerily silent. No birds, no wind, nothing. Just stillness. Then, around midnight, I saw them. At first, they were faint, flickering, small orbs of light hovering just above the ridge. I squinted, adjusting the focus on my binoculars. There they were, three lights bobbing in the air like they were floating on an invisible current. I grabbed my camera, flipping the switch to start recording, but nothing happened. The lens stayed black, the screen dead. What the hell? I muttered, fiddling with the buttons. Fully charged and brand new, the camera shouldn't have malfunctioned. I checked the battery, clicked it back into place, and tried again. Still nothing. Frustration surged through me. This was exactly what I'd come here for. The lights, right there in front of me. And I couldn't even capture them. I stood up, grabbing my thermal scanner, but when I flipped it on, the screen flickered, then went dark. "Come on," I whispered, trying to stay calm. The gear wasn't cheap, and none of it should have been failing, but it was, piece by piece. The lights danced on the ridge, growing brighter, closer. My heart raced. I wasn't scared, I told myself. I was just annoyed. The logical part of my brain struggled to make sense of it. Maybe the electronics were glitching because of interference, some kind of electromagnetic field or something. I took a deep breath, trying to settle my nerves. But the lights, those strange pulsing orbs, kept moving, almost as if they were drifting toward me. The air turned cold. So cold that I could see my breath misting in front of my face. A thin layer of frost started forming on the ground, on the RV windows, on my gear. I pulled my jacket tighter around me, my hands beginning to stiffen in the chill. It didn't make sense. The weather forecast had called for a cool night, but nothing like this. I checked my phone's temperature app. 30 degrees heaters? Impossible. I glanced at my surroundings, feeling the silence close in around me. Then I noticed the lights were no longer on the ridge. They were much closer now, floating just above the treetops, flickering like distant fireflies, but larger. Too large. I watched, heart pounding, as they bobbed and weaved. Their glow cast long shadows on the ground. I pulled out my phone to take a video. The screen flashed, then went black. It wouldn't turn on. Frustration boiled over. I slammed the phone down on the camping table. It bounced. I stood there, fists clenched, trying to keep my cool. This was why people got sucked into believing nonsense, because technology failed at the worst possible moment. The lights weren't supernatural. There had to be an explanation. Maybe the cold was messing with the equipment, or some kind of atmospheric distortion. But then I saw the handprints. Small, faint handprints etched in frost on the RV window. They hadn't been there before. I knew that. I stared at them, my breath catching in my throat. They looked like the handprints of a child, no more than a few inches across, and they were slowly, gradually melting away in the cold. A prickling sensation crawled up the back of my neck. I turned to look at the lights, now hovering at the edge of the forest, close enough that I could make out their eerie bluish glow. They flickered in the trees, moving in slow, lazy circles as if they were watching me, waiting for me. The rational part of my mind screamed that it was impossible. There was no way the lights could have traveled that fast. No way they could be this close. I'd seen videos, read reports. They were always distant, spectral, unreachable. But now they felt personal, as if they were beckoning me. I swallowed, my throat tight. Without thinking, I took a step forward. The cold deepened, pressing in on me from all sides. The frost crept up the sides of the RV, spreading like delicate veins. The temperature continued to drop. My breath came out in ragged gasps, and my vision blurred. The lights drifted deeper into the trees, flickering and glowing, moving in a pattern that felt deliberate, like they wanted me to follow. And I did. I grabbed my flashlight, my hands trembling as I made my way toward the forest's edge. The beam of light was weak, barely cutting through the dark. I kept my eyes on the lights, feeling a strange pull in my chest, like something was urging me forward. As I entered the trees, the world grew darker. The lights danced just out of reach, always a few steps ahead of me, their glow casting an ethereal light on the twisted branches. The forest felt wrong, too quiet, too still. I checked my watch. 2 hours had passed. I hadn't even noticed. My legs ached, and I realized with a sinking feeling that I had no idea how far I'd wandered. The lights flickered again, brightening as they circled a large boulder ahead, and then they stopped, hovering there, motionless. I took a step closer, and that's when the hallucinations began. Shapes. Faint figures moving in the trees, shadows stretching unnaturally long. And there, between the branches, I saw faces. Pale, expressionless faces staring at me with hollow eyes. I blinked, and they were gone. Panic set in. I turned to leave, but the forest had shifted. The path I'd taken was no longer clear. Everything looked the same. The same trees, the same twisting branches. The lights pulsed behind me, glowing brighter as if taunting me. I ran. My breath came in short, sharp bursts. My heart raced in my chest as I stumbled through the underbrush, trying to find my way back to the campsite. The lights flickered at the corners of my vision, but I ignored them. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Light. Quick footsteps crunching through the frost behind me. I didn't dare look back. I ran faster, my flashlight flickering and dying in my hand. I broke through the tree line, gasping for air, and saw the RV ahead. A welcome sight. But the air around it was colder than ever. The frost was so thick on the windows that it looked like snow. And there, pressed against the glass, were more handprints. Dozens of them. I scrambled inside, locking the door behind me, and collapsed on the floor, panting. My entire body trembled with cold and fear. The lights were still out there. I could see them through the frosted windows, flickering in the trees, growing fainter as the night wore on. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. By dawn, they were gone. The temperature returned to normal, and the frost melted away. But I didn't feel safe. Not anymore. I packed up the RV and drove out of Pisgah National Forest, my hands still shaking on the steering wheel. I'd come here to find an explanation, to debunk the Brown Mountain lights. But what I found was something else, something I couldn't explain. And I knew deep down that the lights weren't just a phenomenon. They were something more, something ancient, something dangerous, something that had almost taken me. I don't know what they wanted, but I'll never go back to find out. I was halfway up Blackwater Ridge when Glenn warned me about the lights. His bait shop was the last stop before the mountain trail turned into pure wilderness, and I dropped in for some extra firewood. He was standing behind the counter, leaning on his elbows, watching me load up my supplies. His words hung in the air long after they left his mouth. "People get lost up there," he said, his voice low and cautious. "You hear the stories? I zipped up my jacket and shook my head. What stories? About the lights. They show up when the sun goes down, start flickering in the trees like they're leading you somewhere. But you follow them. You don't come back. I should have known better than to brush him off. I should have asked more questions. But the truth was, I didn't care. I wasn't here for ghost stories or local superstitions. I was here to clear my head after everything that had happened with Ryan, the breakup, the endless nights of replaying every argument in my head. I needed this time away from the world. Just me and my RV parked in the middle of nowhere. Blackwater Ridge had seemed perfect, a remote place where no one could find me, and more importantly, where I wouldn't be tempted to find anyone. I'll be fine, I told Glenn, trying to smile, but his eyes were serious, unblinking. Just watch yourself, he said, handing me a small pouch as I paid for the wood. Keep this with you. Some folks say it helps. What is it? Just something my family's passed down, he said, avoiding my gaze. Might keep the lights away. I didn't believe in that kind of thing, but I pocketed the pouch anyway, more out of politeness than anything else. Then I left the shop, got into my RV, and made my way up the winding mountain road toward Blackwater Ridge. The campsite was exactly what I'd hoped for. Deserted, overgrown, and tucked away in a grove of tall pines. The air smelled crisp and clean, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. The old campground looked like it hadn't been touched in years. There were a few rusted RVs half hidden in the foliage, relics of past campers who had either left them behind or forgotten about them altogether. I parked my RV at the far edge of the grove, close enough to the trees to feel enclosed, but far enough from the abandoned vehicles to avoid any weird vibes. It was perfect, a place to disconnect and forget. That first day was peaceful. I went for a hike, snapped a few photos, and by the time the sun was setting, I was sitting outside by the fire pit, listening to the crackling flames and sipping from a thermos of tea. The sky was clear, and the stars began to poke through the darkness, dotting the sky like tiny pinpricks of light. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. A small flickering light deep in the woods just past the tree line. At first, I thought it was a firefly, but it was too big. It moved slowly, gliding through the trees like it was looking for something, or someone. I sat up, narrowing my eyes to focus. The light was faint but unmistakable. It pulsed gently like a heartbeat, its glow barely reaching me through the dense pines. Then another light appeared beside it. Then another. 3 faint orbs flickering in unison, moving deeper into the forest. Glenn's warning about the lights echoed in my mind, but I shook it off. They were probably just campers in the distance, or maybe a reflection from a house far off the ridge. I wasn't about to let some old superstition spook me on my first night. I sat back, trying to relax, but the lights wouldn't leave me alone. They moved again, gliding slowly through the trees as if they were beckoning me to follow. I could almost hear a whisper in the air, like soft voices drifting on the wind. Come closer. I stood abruptly, shaking my head. No, I muttered to myself. You're not doing this. You came here to get away, not chase after stupid lights in the woods. But the longer I stood there, the harder it was to ignore them. They were so gentle, so inviting. It felt like they were calling me, pulling at some part of me that I couldn't explain. My feet shifted forward, inching toward the forest edge. Come. I blinked, snapping out of it. What was I doing? I wasn't about to follow some strange lights into the woods. Glenn had warned me, hadn't he? I couldn't let myself get sucked into this nonsense. I backed away from the trees, heart pounding, and went back into my RV, slamming the door behind me. The lights flickered one last time outside the window before they disappeared, swallowed by the darkness. The next day, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I spent the morning hiking, trying to focus on anything but what had happened the night before. But the woods felt different now, quieter. The usual sounds of birds and rustling leaves had faded, replaced by a stillness that pressed in on me. Every time I looked over my shoulder, I thought I saw movement, a shadow darting between the trees or the faintest flicker of light just out of sight. I told myself it was paranoia, that I was letting Glenn's warning get under my skin. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. By the time evening came, the anxiety had settled into my bones. I lit another fire and sat outside, staring into the flames, trying to calm myself. But as soon as the sun dipped below the horizon, the lights came back. This time, they were closer. I watched, frozen, as they flickered between the trees, more of them now. 5, maybe 6, all moving in the same slow, rhythmic pattern. They circled the edge of the campground, their glow soft but persistent. I felt that same pull again, stronger this time, like invisible hands reaching out to me. Come. The whispers were clearer now, louder. They filled my ears, my mind, drowning out everything else. It sounded like his voice, Ryan. His soft, pleading tone asking me to come closer, to follow. I stood, my body moving of its own accord. It wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was need. I needed to know what these lights were, where they were leading me. Maybe it was Ryan. Maybe he'd followed me, wanted to make things right. The thought was irrational, but in that moment, it made perfect sense. I took a step toward the forest, then another. My heart raced as I approached the tree line, the lights growing brighter, more vivid. But as I crossed into the shadows, something shifted in the air. The forest felt wrong, twisted, like the trees were closing in around me. The lights flickered erratically, their gentle glow turning sharp, jagged. I froze. The whispers turned darker, harsher. Come now. No, this wasn't right. This wasn't Ryan. This was something else, something wrong. I stumbled back, panic rising in my chest. The lights surged forward, surrounding me, blinding me. In desperation, I grabbed the pouch Glenn had given me, clutching it tightly. The lights flickered wildly, then dimmed. I backed away as the whispers receded and the lights finally disappeared, leaving me alone in the dark woods, shaking. I always hated feeling tethered to anything, so when the relationship ended, I knew I had to get away. No more distractions, no more emotional baggage. I just needed a break. Crater Lake seemed perfect, beautiful, isolated, and most importantly, quiet. I packed my old RV, grabbed some hiking gear, and headed out for a long weekend of camping. I arrived late in the afternoon, the sun already beginning to set behind the towering cliffs surrounding the lake. Crater Lake was as stunning as I'd imagined. Deep blue waters so clear they reflected the sky, encircled by jagged cliffs that loomed like ancient sentinels. The park was busy enough near the main viewpoints, but I was smart. I'd found a campsite far from the crowds, tucked away near the southeastern shore where the trees were thick and the lake was quieter, almost unnervingly so. It was just what I wanted, solitude. But as I parked my RV and set up camp, a strange feeling settled over me. The wind was too still, and even though the lake was calm, there was a low hum in the air, like the whisper of something just out of earshot. I shook it off. Just nerves, I told myself. Nothing to worry about. After all, I hadn't done a solo trip like this since before I met Sarah. The memories tugged at me, but I pushed them away. I spent the first evening by the fire, watching the stars come out as the lake turned to ink. Crater Lake was famous for its clarity, its mirror-like surface reflecting everything above it perfectly. But tonight, the water looked different, darker, maybe even opaque. I stared out across the lake, trying to ignore the strange tightness in my chest when I heard it. A faint sound carried on the wind, laughter, childlike, distant, but unmistakable. I sat up, listening harder. The night was still, but there it was again, faint but clear. I scanned the shoreline, looking for anyone else camping nearby. Nothing but fog creeping over the water and the flickering shadows of my fire. Probably kids playing somewhere across the lake. I muttered to myself, though I didn't believe it. I was too far out. The ranger had said as much when I checked in. This spot was about as secluded as you could get. Besides, the laughter didn't sound right. It was high-pitched, but it echoed strangely, like it was bouncing off the cliffs and the water at the same time. Shaking my head, I stood and stoked the fire, trying to lose myself in the warmth. The sound died away after a few minutes, and eventually I convinced myself it was nothing. Just the wind, or maybe my tired mind playing tricks on me. It had been a long drive, after all. I crawled into the RV that night, settling in for what I hoped would be a peaceful sleep. But the unease stayed with me, clinging to my mind like the fog that now blanketed the campsite. I dreamt of the lake, shapes moving beneath the surface, dark and indistinct, like hands reaching up from the depths. The next day was better. I hiked along the rim of the lake, took in the views, and even managed to shake off some of the weird vibes from the night before. The sunlight was bright and reassuring, cutting through the mist, and the water looked clearer now, less murky. I convinced myself I'd just been tired. That's all it had been. By afternoon, I decided to take the kayak out. The water was calm, almost unnaturally so. The kayak sliced through the surface effortlessly, and for a while, I let myself enjoy it. The silence of the lake was peaceful, broken only by the soft splash of my paddle. Then the ripples started. At first, they were small, nothing more than the gentle rocking of water disturbed by a fish, maybe. But as I moved farther out, the ripples became more pronounced. They seemed to come from nowhere, disturbing the otherwise glassy surface of the lake. I stopped paddling, staring at the water, trying to figure out where they were coming from. There was nothing. No fish, no breeze, no sign of anything that could cause the water to move like that. But the ripples were there, spreading out from somewhere beneath the kayak. That's when I saw it. A dark shape, maybe 15 feet below, moving slowly. It was too large to be a fish and too humanoid to be anything I could easily explain. It floated there for a moment before drifting deeper, vanishing into the darkness. I blinked, gripping my paddle tighter. My heart raced, but I forced myself to breathe. Maybe it was a log, I reasoned, or some weird optical illusion. I was looking through layers of water, after all, and who knew how light refracted down there? But deep down, I didn't believe it. I paddled back to shore faster than I cared to admit, my eyes glued to the water the whole time, watching for any more signs of movement. By the time I made it back to my campsite, the sun was starting to dip, and the fog was rolling in again, thicker this time. The wind picked up just enough to rustle the trees, and with it came that faint sound again. Laughter. This time, I couldn't ignore it. I stood at the edge of the lake, staring out into the mist, trying to pinpoint where the sound was coming from. It was definitely children's voices now, several of them, giggling and splashing. But as I scanned the shoreline, the hairs on the back of my neck prickled. There was no one there. No boats, no campers. Just the fog hanging low over the water like a shroud. I swallowed hard, my mouth suddenly dry. I should have packed up right then, driven away, and never looked back. But I stayed. Stupid, I know. I told myself there had to be an explanation. Crater Lake had its fair share of myths and legends, but I didn't believe in that stuff. I'd never been the superstitious type. Then I saw them, just shadows at first. Small figures standing at the water's edge, half obscured by the fog. They didn't move, just stood there, watching. They were small, like children, but their outlines were blurred, indistinct. I blinked, trying to focus, and in that split second, they were gone. I stepped back from the shore, my heart hammering in my chest. I wasn't seeing things. They were there. I'd seen them. A cold chill washed over me as the wind died, leaving the air deathly still. The whispers started again, faint and melodic, drifting across the water. But this time, they were louder, closer. I backed toward the RV, glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see those figures standing behind me. Nothing. I fumbled with the RV door, slamming it shut behind me and locking it. My hands were shaking, my mind racing. I sat there in the dim light, listening. The whispers grew louder, like they were pressing in on me from all sides. It was as if the voices were coming from the lake itself, echoing relentlessly. I closed my eyes, trying to block it out, but it didn't stop. The sound seeped into my mind, becoming clearer, more distinct. I could hear the splashing of water and the soft giggles turning into cries. It was children drowning, calling for help. I could hear their little hands slapping against the surface of the water, their desperate gasps for air. My breath hitched, panic rising in my chest. I had to get out of here. I threw my gear into the RV, not caring about the mess, as I reached for the ignition. The RV's lights flickered and died. The engine wouldn't turn over. I cursed under my breath, frantically trying the key again and again. Nothing. Outside, the whispers grew louder. I could hear the faint tapping now, soft knocks against the RV windows. My blood ran cold as I turned. Handprints, small, wet handprints, appeared on the windows, slowly sliding down the glass. The whispers turned into cries. The tapping grew more frantic, louder, as if they were trying to get in, trying to pull me out to the water. I backed away, my mind spinning, trying to figure out what the hell was happening. The air inside the RV felt suffocating, thick with dread. Then I heard it, splashing close right outside, like something was struggling in the water. Without thinking, I rushed to the door, flinging it open. The fog was so thick now I could barely see a few feet in front of me, but I could hear the cries for help, the child's voice desperate, calling for me. Help me. Please. My legs carried me toward the lake before my brain could catch up. The water lapped softly at the shore. The cries were louder, more desperate. I could see something out there, flailing in the shallows, a small figure, arms reaching up, struggling against the current. I was almost at the water's edge when the fog shifted just enough for me to see it clearly. The child was translucent, its skin pale and waterlogged. Its eyes were wide, empty sockets. Its mouth was open in a silent scream as it reached for me. Wet, skeletal hands clawed at the water, pulling it closer to me. I stumbled back, my breath caught in my throat. It wasn't real. It couldn't be real. The figure stopped struggling, its head tilting to one side as if studying me. Then it smiled, a cold, unnatural smile that chilled me to my core. I ran, my feet pounding the earth as I raced back to the RV. The laughter faded into the distance, echoing through the fog. I slammed the door behind me, locking it again, collapsing to the floor, gasping for air. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. The whispers, the laughter, the tapping on the windows, they didn't stop until dawn. When the sun finally broke through the fog, I packed up and drove away without looking back. I didn't care that the RV was barely running or that I left half my gear behind. I just needed to get away from that lake. But even now, as I sit in the safety of my apartment, I can still hear them sometimes. The faint whispers, the splashing of water, the laughter. Crater Lake isn't as quiet as it seems, and I know they're still there, waiting. I had been staring at the sinkhole for hours. The edges of the earth had crumbled away into a perfect jagged circle, leaving nothing but a gaping void beneath me. It was unnervingly symmetrical, as though the ground hadn't collapsed on its own, but had been carved out by something or someone. I crouched at the edge, carefully adjusting my geological scanner, but the equipment was giving me nothing but static. The readings were all over the place. This doesn't make sense, I muttered, tapping the scanner in frustration. I hadn't come all the way to Hollow Creek for faulty data. I took a deep breath and scanned the horizon. The thick pines loomed like sentinels around the campground, their pale light of late afternoon casting long shadows across the landscape. My RV sat parked a short distance away, looking small and vulnerable against the vast wilderness of Chugach National Forest. It was a beautiful place, no doubt. Quiet, remote, exactly what I needed to clear my head. But the silence had a weight to it, an unnatural stillness that gnawed at the edges of my mind. I was here on a solo trip, tasked with investigating the sudden appearance of several sinkholes that had been forming in the area. Geological instability was the theory, but something about the way these holes formed had raised red flags from the moment I arrived. The patterns were too precise, too deliberate. My phone buzzed, breaking the silence. It was Ethan, the local park ranger, and the closest thing to human contact I'd had in days. His voice crackled through the static as I picked up. "Hey, Megan, how's it going out there?" "Not great," I admitted. "The equipment's glitching again, and these sinkholes, I don't know. They feel weird. Not like anything I've seen before." Ethan chuckled, but there was an edge to it. "Hollow Creek's always been strange. You wouldn't be the first to think something's off here." "What do you mean?" I asked, standing up and dusting off my jeans. "You ever hear the stories about this place? Locals believe the sinkholes are more than just geological shifts. They think there's something ancient beneath the earth. The indigenous people used to call it the land that breathes. They thought the earth here was alive, that it could swallow you whole if you weren't careful. I rolled my eyes, though the words stirred an uneasy feeling deep in my gut. Sounds like folklore to me. Maybe, Ethan said, his tone serious now. But I'd be careful if I were you. These woods have a way of playing tricks on you. And the sinkholes, well, they've taken people before. People who didn't listen to the warnings. I didn't respond right away, staring down into the abyss of the sinkhole in front of me. I'd studied rocks and underground formations for most of my career, but nothing had prepared me for the unnerving stillness of this place. Thanks for the heads up, I said, trying to keep my voice light. But I'm here to study geology, not ghosts. Ethan sighed. Just don't go too deep, okay? Call if you need anything. I hung up and pocketed the phone, but the conversation lingered in my mind. The land that breathes. Superstition, I told myself. Just old stories. I turned back to the sinkhole. Something inside me itched to see what was beneath the surface, to understand what was causing the ground to shift in such a strange, unnatural way. The patterns in the rocks I had been studying weren't like any natural formation I'd seen before. There were spirals, perfectly etched into the stone, as though by design, not by nature. The deeper I looked, the more I felt like I was standing on the edge of something I wasn't meant to find. That night, the first signs of trouble came in the form of noise, a low, deep rumbling that vibrated through the ground like the hum of a giant unseen machine. It started just as I was finishing dinner, sitting by the campfire. The sounds blended into the whispering wind at first, but then it grew louder, more distinct, like a deep pulse coming from below. I stood, flashlight in hand, scanning the trees. The stars were barely visible, shrouded in the thick clouds that seemed to roll in out of nowhere. The fire flickered, casting eerie shadows on the trees. For a moment, I thought I heard footsteps, something moving in the dark. "Ethan?" I called, my voice small against the vast silence. Nothing. I walked toward the sinkhole, my stomach nodding with every step. The rumbling grew louder, and as I reached the edge, I felt it, vibrations under my feet. The ground beneath me was shifting, alive. I shone my flashlight down into the hole, but the beam disappeared into the blackness, swallowed by the depths. I knelt, running my hand along the edge. The earth was soft, loose, as though it had only recently begun to settle after something had disturbed it. Suddenly, the ground beneath me gave way. I scrambled backward, heart racing, just as a section of the earth collapsed, sending a cascade of dirt and rocks into the sinkhole. I fell onto my back, gasping for air, watching as the hole grew wider, deeper, like a hungry mouth devouring the ground. Adrenaline pumped through me as I backed away, my mind racing. I needed to get out of here. This wasn't normal. This wasn't just a geological phenomenon. Something was moving beneath the surface. Something massive. I rushed back to the RV, the flashlight beam bouncing erratically as I fumbled for the key. But as I reached the door, the ground shook again, harder this time. The sinkhole was growing fast. I had to leave now. But then a thought struck me. What if I was right? What if this was something no one had ever discovered before? If I could just capture proof, if I could document what was really happening here, my work would be revolutionary. I would be vindicated. My mind flashed back to the spirals in the rock, the patterns that had seemed too deliberate to be natural. There was something ancient beneath the earth, and I was so close. I grabbed my gear and rushed back to the edge of the sinkhole. My heart pounded in my chest as I descended carefully into the darkness, lowering myself into the opening. The air grew colder as I went deeper. The walls of the hole were damp and slick beneath my hands. After what felt like an eternity, I reached the bottom. The cavern was vast, much larger than I had anticipated. My flashlight illuminated jagged rock formations, but it was the carvings on the walls that caught my breath. Symbols, spirals etched deep into the stone. They were everywhere, ancient and deliberate. This wasn't just a natural formation. This was a structure, a temple of some kind, buried deep beneath the earth for centuries, maybe longer. I pulled out my camera, hands trembling, and began to record. But as I did, a low, resonating sound filled the cavern, a rhythmic pulse like the beating of a massive heart. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The walls seemed to vibrate with the sound, the ground shifting beneath my feet. And then, from the shadows, I heard it. Footsteps. Heavy, deliberate, coming from the deeper recesses of the cavern. Something was moving toward me. Something massive. My flashlight flickered, casting erratic beams of light across the stone walls. I backed away slowly, my heart hammering in my chest. Whatever was in the darkness, it was getting closer. I could feel its presence, a weight in the air, a primal force that made my skin crawl. The footsteps stopped, and then a deep, guttural growl echoed through the cavern. I ran. I didn't look back. The ground trembled beneath me as I scrambled up the wall of the sinkhole, my hands slipping on the loose earth. The growling grew louder, closer, until I could feel hot breath on the back of my neck. I burst out of the sinkhole, gasping for air, and ran toward the RV. The ground shook violently, and as I reached the door, I glanced back. The sinkhole was collapsing in on itself, the earth swallowing it whole. But for a split second, I saw something massive, serpentine, rising from the depths before it disappeared into the darkness. I didn't wait. I threw open the door, started the engine, and sped away, leaving Hollow Creek behind me. By the time I reached the main road, my heart had finally begun to slow. I was alive. I had made it, but the images of that cavern, those symbols, haunted my mind. I had uncovered something ancient, something that wasn't meant to be found. As I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had disturbed something that should have stayed buried, something that was still there, waiting beneath the earth. And I knew one thing for certain: I wouldn't be going back. I hadn't planned on staying at Stillwater Grove. The campground wasn't even marked on my map, just a small patch of green near the edge of Shawnee National Forest. But as I drove down the empty forest road, I saw the sign, old, weathered wood with the words Stillwater Grove Campground carved into it. It felt like an invitation, one I couldn't resist. I'd been on the road for weeks, photographing wildlife for a personal project I'd picked up after quitting my job. The last few months had been a blur of long drives, lonely campsites, and an overwhelming need to be anywhere but back in the city. I didn't miss my corporate job or my ex. What I did miss was the feeling that I knew what the hell I was doing with my life. Stillwater Grove seemed perfect, quiet, isolated, and right by the lake. It would give me the break I needed, some peace before heading back into the real world. When I pulled into the campsite, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the grove. The air was still, the only sound being the gentle lapping of water against the shore. A single RV sat on the far side of the campground, a distant figure moving near it. Otherwise, it was just me. I parked my RV near the edge of the lake, the water glistening under the fading light. After setting up camp, I grabbed my camera and headed toward the shore, hoping to catch the sunset. As I stood there, framing the perfect shot, a voice startled me. "Beautiful, isn't it?" I turned to see a woman standing a few feet away, her face half in shadow. She had an otherworldly kind of beauty, pale skin, long dark hair, and eyes that seemed to take in everything. "Yeah," I replied, lowering my camera. "It's peaceful." She smiled. "It always is here." "I'm Ellie, by the way." "Nick," I said, shaking her outstretched hand. Her skin was cold, like she'd been standing in the shade for too long. "You camping here too?" "For a little while," she said, her voice soft. "I come here every now and then. Can't stay away." Her words sent a shiver down my spine, though I couldn't explain why. I wasn't used to talking to people much anymore. The solitude had become my comfort zone, and something about Ellie felt out of place. "You here for the fishing?" I asked, trying to make small talk. She shook her head. "No, just the lake, the quiet." We stood in silence for a moment, watching the sun sink behind the trees. The sky turned shades of pink and orange, the water reflecting the colors like a mirror. I raised my camera, snapping a few shots, and when I looked back, Ellie was gone, just like that. I glanced around, but there was no sign of her. The other RV was still parked at the far end of the grove, but there was no movement. I chalked it up to her being quick on her feet, though it left me feeling oddly unsettled. That night, I couldn't sleep. The wind had picked up, making the trees outside rustle against each other like whispered secrets. I rolled over in bed, trying to find a comfortable position, but something felt off. The RV was too cold, colder than it should have been. I checked the thermostat, but everything seemed normal. Still, the chill lingered. I grabbed a blanket and tried to force myself to sleep. That's when I heard it. A faint sound, barely audible at first, like a woman's voice carried on the wind. I sat up, listening, but it was gone. Just my imagination, I thought. Long days alone in the woods will do that to you. But then I heard it again. This time it was clearer, a soft melodic humming coming from outside. I climbed out of bed, grabbing my flashlight. My breath fogged up in the cold air as I stepped outside the RV, scanning the campsite. Nothing. Just the stillness of the lake and the trees swaying gently in the wind. But the humming persisted, coming from near the water's edge. I walked toward the shore, the beam of my flashlight dancing over the ground. And that's when I saw her. A woman in white, standing at the edge of the lake, her back to me. Her long, dark hair hung loose down her back, swaying slightly as she hummed that haunting tune. "Ellie?" I called out, my voice shaking. She didn't turn. She just stood there, motionless, her gaze fixed on the water. Something about the way she stood, so still, so rigid, set my nerves on edge. I took a step closer, the flashlight illuminating her pale figure. But as soon as the light touched her, she vanished. I blinked, stunned. 1 second, she'd been there, and the next, she was gone. The water rippled where she had been standing, but otherwise, the lake was empty. I backed away, my heart pounding in my chest. What the hell was that? I hurried back to the RV, locking the door behind me. My breath came in quick, shallow gasps. My hands were shaking. I didn't believe in ghosts or supernatural nonsense, but what I'd seen, it wasn't right. I had seen her. I knew I had. I spent the rest of the night wide awake, staring at the ceiling and trying to rationalize what had happened. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the image of that woman standing by the lake. The next morning, I found Ellie near the grove, sitting by a small campfire. She smiled when she saw me, though her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "Rough night?" she asked, as if she already knew. "Yeah," I said, sitting down across from her. "I saw something last night, a woman by the lake. I thought it was you, but she wasn't there when you got close." Ellie finished, her voice calm, too calm. "The Lady of Stillwater." "The what?" I asked, feeling a chill run through me. Ellie looked at me, her eyes dark and hollow. "She's been here for a long time, longer than the campground, longer than the trees. She drowned in the lake, or so the story goes. Some say she was waiting for someone. Her lover, I think, but he never showed." I stared at her, my stomach twisting. "You're telling me she's a ghost?" Ellie shrugged. "Call it what you want, but she's real. And now that you've seen her, she won't let you go." I laughed, though it came out shaky. "That's insane." "Is it?" Ellie asked, her gaze locking onto mine. "You saw her. You know she's real." I opened my mouth to argue, but the words died in my throat. I had seen her, and it hadn't been a trick of the light or my imagination. Something had been there, something that shouldn't have been. "What does she want?" I asked quietly. Ellie's eyes flicked toward the lake. "She wants what she's always wanted, to take someone with her into the water." That night, the sound started again. At first, it was the soft humming drifting through the night air, then the splashing, gentle, rhythmic, like someone wading through the water. I lay in bed, my heart racing, my body tense. I didn't want to go outside. I didn't want to see her again. But the pull was stronger this time. A strange compulsion tugged at me, drawing me toward the lake. I tried to fight it, to stay in the RV, but my legs moved on their own, carrying me outside into the cold night air. The lake was calm, reflecting the pale moonlight. And there she was, standing in the water, her white dress billowing around her as if moved by an unseen current. "Come to me," she whispered, her voice soft but clear. "Please, come." I took a step forward, my body moving against my will. The water lapped at my shoes, and I could feel the cold seeping into my skin. "Come with me," she said again, her voice almost pleading now. "I've waited so long. I fought to resist, to break free from whatever force was drawing me in. But my feet kept moving, the water now up to my knees, freezing cold. I could feel the pull of the lake, the weight of the water dragging me down. Suddenly, a hand grabbed my arm, yanking me back with such force that I stumbled onto the shore. Ellie stood beside me, her face pale, her grip strong. "You have to leave," she said, her voice urgent now, "before it's too late." I looked back at the lake, but the woman was gone. The water was still, as if nothing had happened. "What the hell is happening?" I gasped, my breath coming in shallow bursts. Ellie's expression was grim. "She's marked you now. If you stay, she'll take you. You have to go." I didn't argue. I packed up my things, my hands shaking, adrenaline coursing through my veins. Within minutes, I was back in the RV, starting the engine and pulling out of the campsite as fast as I could. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. Ellie stood at the edge of the grove, watching me go, her face unreadable, and behind her, just barely visible in the mist, was the Lady of Stillwater, her pale eyes following me, waiting for me to return. I didn't look back again. The Great Smoky Mountains had always been a dream destination, a place of beauty, solitude, and isolation where I could lose myself in the woods and maybe find myself again. After the breakup with Eric, I needed an escape, something to remind me that I was capable, that I could handle life on my own. Mark, of course, wouldn't let me do it alone. My brother insisted on coming along, and with him came Na, his bubbly girlfriend, and Lucas, a friend of his who seemed more interested in me than the mountains. The whole trip was supposed to be a solo adventure, but I caved. I figured I could handle them for a weekend. We set out early on Friday, and the trailhead was already buzzing with tourists, their laughter filling the crisp morning air. Mark led the way, checking his map obsessively while lugging around half a camping store's worth of gear. He liked to over-prepare for everything. Na, naturally cheerful, hummed some pop song as she skipped along behind him. Lucas stuck close to me, his jokes falling flat and his flirtations rolling off me like water on rock. I was there for the hike. The Smokies were breathtaking. The way the mist clung to the rolling hills, the distant sound of water rushing through the trees, the deep green of the pines and ferns that hugged the path. If I could just let myself melt into that wilderness, I thought, I might forget the reason I came here in the first place. But that sense of peace didn't last long. By the time we reached the more remote trail where we planned to camp, the crowds had thinned out. It was just us, and I was grateful for the quiet, at least at first. But as the sun began to dip behind the mountains, a strange heaviness settled over the forest. The cheerful calls of birds disappeared, replaced by an eerie stillness. "Something feels off," I said, mostly to myself. "You're just not used to the quiet," Lucas replied, a grin plastered on his face. "This is the best part. Just us and the wild." I nodded, but couldn't shake the sensation. As we set up camp, Mark was his usual methodical self, making sure the tents were positioned perfectly and ensuring the fire pit was well constructed. Meanwhile, Lucas's tent wouldn't stay upright. The poles sagged despite his best efforts. Na laughed at his struggle, but I could sense the rising frustration. "You didn't exactly bring a 5-star hotel, huh?" she teased. I didn't blame her for laughing. Lucas's tent was a joke, but when the wind picked up later that night, it was less funny. The flimsy thing shook and collapsed in on him. Halfway through dinner, Mark offered to help him fix it, but Lucas waved him off. "I'll manage," he muttered, clearly embarrassed. I felt a twinge of guilt, but the night was closing in fast, and we all needed rest. We sat around the fire, the woods around us thick with shadows. The Smokies, which had seemed so beautiful just hours earlier, now felt ominous. We were miles from the nearest ranger station, out of cell service, with nothing but trees and mountains for company. And then, just as we were beginning to relax, we heard it, a distant scream. It was high-pitched, echoing through the valley. It wasn't human, but it wasn't quite animal either. The sound made my skin crawl. "Cougar," Mark said, but he didn't sound convinced. Yeah, right, Lucas scoffed, throwing another log on the fire. That's the Wampus cat. He grinned, as if he'd just cracked some hilarious joke, but no one laughed. I hadn't grown up around here, but I knew enough about Appalachian folklore to recognize the name. The Wampus cat was the stuff of campfire stories. Half woman, half beast, cursed to stalk the woods and hunt down anyone who ventured too far from civilization. Don't joke about that, Na said, her voice wavering. People say they've seen it. Mark, ever the pragmatist, rolled his eyes. It's just a legend. Probably an owl or something. But as the night wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The fire cast long shadows, and every crack of a twig in the distance made my heart skip. I wrapped my arms around my knees, trying to focus on the warmth of the fire and Na's cheerful chatter, but the unease settled deep into my bones. When I went to bed that night, I couldn't sleep. Every rustle of leaves outside my tent sounded too close. I kept thinking about that scream and the way it had seemed to echo from all directions. Eventually, exhaustion took over, and I drifted into a restless sleep. The next day, the tension between us started to show. Mark was irritable, frustrated that we weren't sticking to his planned itinerary. Na tried to keep the mood light, but her jokes felt forced. Lucas was quieter than usual, as though the previous night's collapse of his tent had deflated his bravado. It didn't help that the wildlife we encountered seemed wrong. Deer stood unnaturally still, watching us with glassy eyes. We came across a black bear in the distance, and instead of lumbering away as they usually do, it stood on its hind legs, staring at us for far too long. I didn't mention it to the others, but I noticed that every time we passed an animal, it was facing us, not the other way around. They're just curious, Mark said when I finally pointed it out, but I wasn't so sure. By the time we made it back to camp that evening, a low fog had settled in around the trees, shrouding everything in a thick, wet blanket. My unease from the night before returned, stronger than ever. I set my gear down near the fire pit and wandered toward the edge of camp, drawn to the stillness that felt too unnatural. As I stood there scanning the woods, something moved in the distance. At first, it was just a shadow, a blur of movement between the trees. I blinked, thinking my eyes were playing tricks on me. But then I saw it again. Something humanoid, but not quite. It was tall, hunched, and moved with a feline grace. For a split second, I swore I saw glowing yellow eyes staring back at me from the shadows. Hannah? I jumped, startled by Mark's voice. Yeah, I lied, turning back to the fire, but I kept looking over my shoulder, searching the tree line for any sign of the creature. Nothing. But I knew I hadn't imagined it. That night, the woods came alive with sound. The same scream echoed through the trees, but this time it was closer, louder. I could hear branches snapping in the distance, something big moving through the underbrush. Na woke with a start, her eyes wide with fear. Mark, she whispered, shaking him awake. Something's out there. Lucas sat up too, his face pale in the firelight. It's the Wampus cat, he said. But this time there was no humor in his voice. I glanced at Mark, hoping for some reassurance, but even he looked rattled. We need to stay together, Mark said, his voice low and steady. Whatever it is, it's probably just curious. Let's not provoke it. But as the night wore on, the sounds grew closer, branches breaking, heavy footsteps circling our camp. I gripped the camping knife I kept in my pack, my hands slick with sweat. The fire crackled weakly, its light barely piercing the thick fog that had rolled in again, and then it attacked. It happened so fast. 1 minute, we were huddled around the fire, and the next, something lunged from the shadows, knocking Lucas off his feet. He screamed, scrambling to get away, but the creature, whatever it was, slashed at him with claws I could barely see. Blood sprayed across the campsite, dark and viscous in the firelight. Run! Mark shouted, grabbing Na and pulling her toward the trail, but I couldn't move. I was frozen, staring at the thing that had attacked Lucas. It was like nothing I'd ever seen, half human, half mountain lion, its eyes glowing yellow as it crouched over him, growling low in its throat. Hannah! Mark yelled again, and that snapped me out of it. I ran. The four of us tore through the woods, barely able to see the trail in the thick fog. I could hear Lucas behind us, his footsteps growing fainter, his breath ragged. The Wampus cat was toying with us, letting us run, letting us think we had a chance. It let out another ear-piercing scream, and I knew it was coming for us. "We need to stop it!" I gasped, my lungs burning as I struggled to keep up with Mark and Na. "Fire!" Mark glanced back at me, his face pale with fear. "It's scared of fire." "We can't stop now," I said, but we didn't have a choice. The Wampus cat was right behind us, its footsteps growing louder, closer. I could see the glow of its eyes through the trees, the way it moved, darting between the shadows. We reached the edge of a clearing, and Mark stopped dead in his tracks. "Hannah, light it! Light everything!" I fumbled with the matches in my pack, my hands shaking. We piled everything we had, gear, clothes, food, into a makeshift bonfire and lit it. The flames roared to life, casting long shadows across the clearing. For a moment, the Wampus cat hesitated, its eyes reflecting the firelight. It circled the edge of the clearing, growling low in its throat, but it didn't come closer. We stood there, panting, watching as the creature melted back into the shadows, its eyes the last thing to disappear. We stayed there until dawn, huddled around the fire, too scared to move. Lucas never caught up. By morning, we were exhausted, bloodied, and broken, but we were alive. We never found Lucas's body. Mark didn't talk about what happened, and Na didn't speak much either. We made it back to the ranger station, where they told us we'd probably been attacked by a bear, but I knew better. The Wampus cat was real, and it was still out there, waiting for its next victim. The road wound through the dense trees, snaking deeper into the heart of the low national forest. The thick canopy above allowed only sparse sunlight to filter through, casting shadows across the narrow dirt road. I gripped the steering wheel of my RV, trying to shake off the gnawing sense of unease creeping up my spine. It had been 3 hours since I'd passed another vehicle. Solitude was the whole point, wasn't it? This trip was supposed to help me clear my head, to reconnect with myself after the divorce. I had spent the last few months in a fog, and this trip to Deadwood Creek was meant to be my escape. A test of independence. No ex-husband, no stress, just me in the wilderness. I needed this. At least, that's what I'd been telling myself for the past 2 weeks. Deadwood Creek Campground wasn't listed on any mainstream maps, just a blip on an obscure site for hardcore campers who sought isolation. The campground had a reputation, but that was part of the appeal. I needed remote quiet, far away from anything that reminded me of what I'd left behind. But as I pulled into the clearing, past the sign half buried in moss that read Deadwood Creek, a shiver ran through me. The place was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that makes you second-guess your decision to be alone. I parked the RV near a small, trickling creek. The only other vehicle was an old, beat-up camper a short distance away, nestled under the towering pines. It was empty. No sign of movement, no campfire. Good. I wasn't in the mood for socializing. I stepped out into the cool afternoon air and surveyed the site. The woods were thick, ancient. The ground was littered with pine needles, muffling the sound of my footsteps. A perfect retreat. I set up camp, unfolding my chair and setting my mug of tea beside me as I sat by the creek, listening to the soft gurgle of the water. It was peaceful, just as I'd hoped. But after a while, the peace felt off, too still. The air grew heavy, pressing down on me, and the silence wasn't comforting anymore. It was oppressive. My mind wandered back to the stories I'd read online, the rumors about Deadwood Creek's dark history. This used to be a mining settlement during the gold rush, or so the tale went. Dozens of men had come to find their fortunes, but most found only death. Mysterious disappearances, bodies never recovered. Some say the men still haunt the place, bound to the land, working their endless shifts beneath the earth. I dismissed it at first, chalking it up to local folklore meant to spook tourists. But now, sitting alone in the fading light, the stories didn't seem so far-fetched. The wind rustled the trees, and I jumped at the sound. "Get it together, Hannah," I thought, rolling my eyes at my own nerves. I hadn't come all this way just to scare myself into leaving. That's when I saw him, a man standing near the edge of the campground, just at the tree line, leaning against a tree. He was tall, with broad shoulders and a scruffy beard, his clothes worn and dirty as if he'd been out here for weeks. His gaze was fixed on me. I waved awkwardly, and he lifted a hand in response before slowly walking over. "Didn't mean to spook you," he said, his voice easy, almost too casual. "Didn't expect anyone else out here this late in the season." "I wasn't expecting anyone either," I replied, forcing a smile. "Just needed some time alone, you know?" "Yeah, I get that," he chuckled, though the sound didn't quite reach his eyes. "I'm Rick, by the way. Been coming here for years." I nodded, unsure what to say. Rick had the look of someone who belonged out here, who knew the woods like the back of his hand. I didn't. "Be careful out here," Rick said after a pause, his gaze drifting toward the woods. "Deadwood Creek's got a history. Strange things happen when the sun goes down." My skin prickled at his words, but I forced myself to laugh. "Let me guess. Ghost stories? Miners and all that?" Rick's expression didn't change. "Something like that. Just don't stray too far from your camp." He turned and walked back to his camper without another word, leaving me with a knot of unease in my stomach. That night, I couldn't sleep. The RV was quiet, the temperature inside dropping faster than I expected. I wrapped myself in blankets and tried to ignore the feeling that something was wrong. Then the sound started. At first, I thought it was the wind, but soon I realized it was more than that. Faint at first, barely perceptible. A rhythmic clinking echoed from the direction of the creek. It sounded like tools, mining tools, pickaxes striking rock. I bolted upright in bed, my heart pounding. No, I was just imagining it. This was what I came here for, solitude. But I couldn't shake the sound. It was getting louder, the metallic rhythm persistent, almost like a heartbeat. I grabbed a flashlight and climbed out of the RV, my breath visible in the cold night air. The forest was a wall of darkness, the trees looming overhead like silent sentinels. The sound of the creek was louder now, rushing over rocks, and I could swear I heard voices, whispers carried on the wind. My flashlight beam swept across the campsite, catching nothing but trees and the faint shimmer of water. But then I saw them. Figures, shadowy, half-formed shapes moving by the creek. Their outlines faint but unmistakably human. They moved like they were working, digging, swinging pickaxes in time with the clinking sound. My throat tightened as I realized they weren't there in the normal sense. They were translucent, faded. I stumbled back, my mind scrambling to make sense of it. Ghosts? No, that was impossible. I backed toward the RV, my pulse racing, but as I turned, I nearly collided with Rick. "Easy," he said, raising his hands. "I saw your light, thought I'd come check on you." I couldn't find the words to explain what I'd just seen. But Rick didn't need me to. He just looked over at the creek and nodded, his face unreadable. "They come out at night, the miners. Been here for over a century, trapped in their own hell." I swallowed hard, trying to suppress the rising panic. "You mean you know about this? What is this place?" Rick gave a half smile, though it was more sad than comforting. "Deadwood Creek. These men came here to find gold, but all they found was death. Now they're stuck here, working the land forever. Some nights, they're just echoes. Other nights..." He trailed off, but the implication was clear. On other nights, they weren't just echoes. You get used to the rhythm of the road after a while. The hum of the engine beneath you, the steady pull of the truck, the highway stretching out like a never-ending ribbon. It's a kind of solitude I've come to appreciate over the years. I'm Ben Grady, though most folks call me Bear on account of my size, and I've been behind the wheel for a long time. Trucking's simple. You pick up a load, drop it off, and keep moving. That's what I liked about it. But this job was different from the start. I'd picked up the trailer in Chicago. The client was a slick, suited guy, one of those corporate types. Barely even looked at me as he handed over the papers. "Keep the trailer locked," he said, like it was the most natural thing in the world. No stops, no questions. I should have known something was off. The pay was double the usual rate, too good for a straightforward haul across I-80 to Salt Lake City. But I was behind on bills, and after the divorce. Well, You don't say no to easy money. Now, somewhere between Kearney and North Platte, Nebraska, in the dead of night, that easy money was starting to feel like blood money. The road was empty, save for the occasional distant glow of farmhouses, but otherwise, it was just me, my rig, and miles of flat highway. Nothing but darkness ahead and behind. My truck's headlights cut through the night, illuminating the white lines on the road, but something about the blackness beyond felt heavier than usual, like it was waiting. I tried not to think too hard about it. Just keep driving, get to Salt Lake, drop the load, and forget about it. Simple. But then the first strange thing happened. The truck's temperature gauge started going haywire, flipping between cold and hot so fast I thought it was broken. First, the cab was freezing. Then it was sweltering, all within minutes. I pulled over onto the shoulder, popped the hood, and checked the engine. Everything looked fine. I chalked it up to a glitch in the electronics. These rigs are built to last, but every now and then something acts up. Satisfied I wasn't about to fry the engine, I climbed back in. But as I settled into the driver's seat, I heard it, a soft thump from the trailer. I froze, my hand halfway to the ignition. It was faint, but there was no mistaking it. Something had moved in the back. I forced myself to breathe slowly. It's nothing, probably just the cargo shifting. Hell, I didn't even know what was in there. But heavy loads can settle like that. Still, a knot twisted in my gut. It was too quiet, too deliberate. For a second, I thought about checking the trailer, but the client's voice echoed in my mind. Keep it locked. No stops, no questions. Fine. I wasn't going to ask any questions, and I sure as hell wasn't going to break the lock. I fired up the engine and got back on the road, but the tension lingered. The temperature gauge flickered again. I adjusted the air vents, trying to ignore the unease creeping up my spine. A few miles down the highway, the radio crackled to life. I nearly jumped out of my seat. Ben, a voice whispered through the static. I stared at the CB, my heart hammering in my chest. I hadn't heard another trucker's voice all night. The road was dead empty. The voice on the radio, though, it wasn't a trucker. It was my voice. I grabbed the mic, my knuckles white around it. Who the hell is this? The static fizzled, then came back stronger, hissing and popping in my ears. Ben, you need to stop. I dropped the mic like it was burning my hand, cursing under my breath. It had to be a prank, someone screwing around on the frequency, maybe picking up my name from a previous broadcast. But that didn't make sense. The only chatter I'd had was hours ago, and I hadn't said much more than where I was heading. As I stared at the radio, a chill crawled over me. Then the trailer thumped again, louder this time. I jerked my eyes to the side mirror, half expecting to see something clawing its way out of the trailer. But all I saw was the dark outline of the rig behind me, its taillights glowing faintly in the blackness. Another thump, followed by a low scratching sound like nails on metal. That was it. I couldn't take it anymore. I was getting out and checking the damn thing. To hell with the lock. Maybe the cargo had shifted. Maybe there was an animal in there. I didn't care. I just needed to know. I pulled over again, this time in the middle of nowhere. The road was surrounded by nothing but fields and distant silos. I climbed out of the cab, the cold night air biting at my skin, and grabbed the key from my pocket. As I approached the back of the trailer, the scratching grew louder, more frantic. Whatever was in there, it was alive. I unlocked the heavy padlock, my heart pounding in my ears, and swung open the doors. The smell hit me first, not the musty smell of old cargo, but something far worse, a stench of decay, like something rotten in the dark. My stomach churned, but I lifted my flashlight and pointed it inside. For a moment, I thought the trailer was empty. But then I saw it. At the far end of the trailer, hunched in the shadows, was a figure. It was humanoid but twisted, like its body had been mangled and warped. Its limbs were too long, its skin pale and slick, almost translucent. The thing was huddled against the wall, its back to me, but I could hear it breathing, shallow and rapid. "What the hell?" I whispered, stepping back, the beam of my flashlight shaking. The thing turned its face. If you could call it that. It was a mess of raw red flesh, eyes sunken deep to its skull, staring at me with a mix of hunger and desperation. Its mouth opened in a wet, gaping maw, and I heard a low, guttural hiss escape its throat. I stumbled backward, nearly dropping the flashlight. My body screamed at me to run, to get the hell out of there, but my feet were frozen to the spot. The creature moved, its elongated limbs unfolding as it dragged itself toward me. Each step was punctuated by the sickening sound of its flesh scraping against the metal floor. I didn't think. I just slammed the trailer door shut and fumbled with the lock. My fingers trembled so hard I could barely get it secured. The thing inside let out a shriek. A sound so unnatural, so piercing, it felt like it was burrowing into my skull. I stumbled back to the cab, my legs shaking beneath me, and jumped inside, slamming the door shut behind me. For a moment, I just sat there, my breath coming in ragged gasps. What the hell had I just seen? What had they put in my truck? I knew I couldn't stay parked on the side of the road, not with whatever that thing was still inside. I had to move, get away from here. But I also knew I couldn't drive that thing to Salt Lake. No way. Whatever was in the back of my trailer, it wasn't going to make it to its destination. I grabbed the CB mic again, my hand shaking. This is Ben Grady. I hesitated, glancing in the side mirror, half expecting to see the creature clawing its way out. I need help. There's something in my trailer. Static. Then, through the crackling noise, I heard it again. Ben, you need to stop. My voice, clearer this time, like it was coming from right beside me. I slammed the mic down, shifting into gear and pulling back onto the road. I didn't know where I was going anymore. Just away. Away from that thing, away from whatever nightmare I'd gotten myself into. As I sped down the highway, the temperature gauge flickered again, this time dropping into the red. The cab grew colder. My breath was visible in the air, and I could hear the trailer groaning behind me. The thing inside was still moving, still scratching, trying to get out. The radio crackled one last time. Ben, it's too late. I glanced at the dashboard. Every light was blinking. The engine sputtered as the temperature dropped even lower. I could feel the rig slowing, like the weight of the trailer was dragging it down, like whatever was inside was getting heavier by the second. And then the truck stopped dead in the middle of the highway. The engine cut out. The lights flickered before plunging me into complete darkness. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. The only sound was the soft, steady scratching from the trailer behind me. The door handle rattled. Something pressed against the cab from the outside, its weight heavy enough to rock the truck. I didn't turn. I didn't want to see what was trying to get in, but I knew it wouldn't be long before the door opened. That's the last I remember. When they found me the next morning, the rig was empty. No sign of the trailer. No sign of the cargo. Just me, sitting in the cab, frozen stiff, my breath still fogging in the cold morning air. I never asked what happened to the trailer. Some things are better left locked away. There's a piece you find on the road late at night when the only thing lighting your way is your own headlights slicing through the dark. No noise, no distractions, just you, the hum of the engine, and the endless stretch of asphalt. That's why I love it out here. There's no mess, nothing like the life I left behind. Just the road. My name's Lucas Turner, but most folks call me Lucky. It's an old nickname from when I used to get myself out of sticky situations, both on and off the road. I guess I've lived up to it, though I've never been one for superstition. If you stay calm and keep moving forward, things usually work out. But that night on Route 2, the nickname didn't feel so fitting anymore. I'd left Seattle earlier that day, hauling a load of electronics to a distribution center in North Dakota. A long stretch of mostly empty highway lay between me and the drop-off, but I didn't mind. It was a quiet night, just the way I liked it. No cars, no people, just the stars overhead and the empty plains around me. The deeper I drove into Montana, the quieter it got. Nothing but the hum of my rig and the occasional flicker of static on the CB. But somewhere along that desolate stretch of US Route 2, the static changed. It wasn't just background noise anymore. It started to sound like something trying to break through, a faint voice hidden in the distortion. I adjusted the dial, trying to clear it up, but all I got was more static. After a few minutes, the voice faded, and I figured it was just some distant radio chatter from a passing trucker. I wasn't tired yet, but I was getting there. I hadn't slept much since the divorce, and nights like this, long and quiet, always gave me too much time to think. Sometimes you drive to outrun what's on your mind. Problem is, it's always waiting for you when you stop. Just as I was about to switch the CB off and turn up my music, the radio crackled to life again. This time the voice was clearer, a low monotone that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. 752, it said, repeating the number slowly like it was reading coordinates. I grabbed the mic and keyed up. "This is Lucky Turner, eastbound on Route 2. You got a copy?" Nothing, just static. Then the voice again, quieter this time. "7052, you need to stop." I frowned, the words sending a chill through me. I hadn't heard anyone nearby on the CB all night, so where the hell was this coming from? I glanced at the GPS out of habit, but it showed nothing unusual, just the straight road ahead. I kept driving, trying to shake off the unease. About an hour later, the same numbers came through again, but this time it wasn't just numbers. Lucas. I slammed on the brakes, pulling over to the side of the road so fast the rig shuddered beneath me. The voice had said my name. I cut the engine, my heart racing. The radio was dead silent now, nothing but the low hum of static, like the voice had never been there at all. I rubbed my hands together, trying to calm down. It had to be some kind of weird signal bounce, maybe from a nearby base, old military broadcasts or something. That happens sometimes out here. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I stepped out of the cab, needing to clear my head, and breathed in the cold, crisp night air. The road was dead empty, nothing but flat plains and dark woods on either side. No headlights, no signs of life. I walked around the truck, stretching my legs, telling myself it was just fatigue playing tricks on me. But when I glanced down the road, I saw a pair of headlights in the distance. At first, I thought it was another trucker, but the lights didn't seem to be moving. They just sat there. I watched for a minute, waiting for the truck to approach, but it never did. The lights stayed exactly where they were, flickering slightly in the dark. Something about them didn't feel right. It was like they were watching me. "Don't be an idiot, Lucky," I muttered to myself, climbing back into the cab. But as I settled into the driver's seat and fired up the engine again, I couldn't shake the feeling that those lights were still there, even as I pulled away. I pushed the truck hard, wanting to put some distance between me and whatever was behind me. But the farther I drove, the more the radio interference grew. It was subtle at first, just little bursts of static, but then it got louder, and within that static, I could hear it again. "Lucas, 7052. I checked the mirrors, my heart hammering in my chest. That's when I saw the convoy. 3 trucks, old military rigs by the look of them. They were in a tight formation, following about 100 yards behind me. I hadn't passed them on the road, hadn't seen them pull out from anywhere. They were just there, like they'd appeared out of nowhere. My grip tightened on the wheel. I had 2 options: stop and let them pass, or keep going and pretend like nothing was wrong. My gut told me to keep going, but no matter how fast I drove, the trucks stayed right behind me, their headlights burning bright in the dark. And that voice, Eddie's voice, kept slipping through the static on the CB. "You need to stop, Lucas." I slammed my fist on the dashboard, adrenaline surging through me. This couldn't be real. Eddie was dead, had been for years, and yet his voice kept coming, clear as day, telling me to stop. I passed a small sign on the roadside. Deadwood Ridge, 2 miles. That's where the voice had been leading me. 7052. It was a set of coordinates. Coordinates that pointed directly to Deadwood Ridge. I didn't want to go there. Every instinct screamed at me to keep moving, to get as far away as possible. But the voice, Eddie's voice, had a pull I couldn't shake. Something was waiting for me there. Something I had to face. When the turnoff for Deadwood Ridge appeared, my hands moved before my mind could catch up. I took the exit. The old narrow road wound through thick trees, and as soon as I turned, the convoy behind me vanished. Just like that. Gone. The road twisted and turned, narrowing with every mile, until I came to an old gate, rusted, broken, hanging off its hinges. Beyond it, hidden in the woods, I could see the remains of an old military base, abandoned, decaying, like something out of a nightmare. I cut the engine and stepped out into the cold, my breath fogging in the air. The place was silent. The only sound was the wind whistling through the trees. My gut told me to leave, but my feet kept moving, pulling me toward the base. Inside the fence, I found an old radio tower. Its rusted skeleton still stood against the night sky. At the base of the tower, there was a small building, just a single room, the door hanging open. I stepped inside, my boots crunching on the broken concrete, and that's when I saw it. An old military radio, still running, its dials glowing faintly in the dark. The static from the CB was coming from here, filling the room with that same eerie hum I'd heard on the road. And then, from the radio, Eddie's voice again. "Lucas, it's time to stop." The temperature dropped sharply, and I felt something behind me, something watching. I turned, and there he was, Eddie, standing in the doorway, just as he had been the day he died. His eyes were hollow, his face pale, his expression blank. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. "Eddie?" He didn't respond, just stared at me, unmoving. "I'm sorry," I whispered, the words choking out of me. "I should have been there. I should have." Eddie's face twisted. His mouth opened in a silent scream, and suddenly the radio exploded in a burst of static. The air around me felt heavy, like it was pressing down on my chest, and I staggered back, my pulse racing. "Lucas!" Eddie's voice rasped from the radio, distorted and wrong. "Stop now." The lights in the building flickered, and for a moment, everything went black. When they came back on, Eddie was gone. The radio was silent. I didn't wait for an explanation. I bolted out of the building, ran back to the truck, and peeled out of there as fast as I could. The engine roared as I tore down the road. I didn't look back, didn't check the mirrors. I just drove. When I finally got back on Route 2, the radio was silent, no static, no voices, just the empty road and the stars overhead. I never did figure out what happened that night. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was something else. But I know one thing. I don't drive that stretch of road anymore. Whatever was out there, whatever was calling me to that place, it's something best left alone. Some things, once you hear them, never stop echoing. I never wanted to take the job, not this one. But when the bills pile up and your savings start running dry, you do what you have to, even if it means going back to the place you swore you'd never see again. Dead Man's Pass. It was Eddie's death that did it. 15 years ago, I lost my brother on that road. His rig skidded off a curve and plunged into the canyon. I was driving a mile behind him when it happened. Saw the whole thing through my windshield like a damn nightmare, unfolding in slow motion. I've never been the same since. I never could forgive myself for not doing more, not being there to help. That's how it goes in this life. You haul, you drive, you move forward, keep the past in the rear view. But it's never that simple, is it? I'm Hank Collins, but most people on the road know me as Rusty. Maybe it's the hair going gray, or maybe it's just the wear and tear of 30 years behind the wheel. I've spent most of my life running rigs, hauling everything from livestock to construction equipment. This time, I was hauling heavy machinery for a mining outfit in Utah. Easy enough, or so I thought. The cargo didn't bother me. What bothered me was the route, Route 163, through the heart of Monument Valley, and then up through Dead Man's Pass, the very stretch of road where Eddie lost his life. I've avoided it for years, but I couldn't avoid it this time. The money was too good, and the job came at a time when I needed it most. The first sign that something wasn't right came when I crossed into the desert. The vast expanse of red rocks stretched out for miles, the sun beginning to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the road. It should have been peaceful, almost beautiful, but there was something off. The radio cut out first, static, then silence. Not unusual out here, but it didn't sit right. The stillness felt heavy, oppressive, like the desert itself was holding its breath. As the sun slipped away completely, I noticed a pair of headlights in my rearview mirror. At first, I didn't think much of it. Probably another trucker making the same route. But as the miles passed, those headlights didn't get closer. They stayed there, far back but steady, like whoever it was didn't intend to pass or fall behind, just keeping pace. I tried to shake it off, focusing on the road ahead. The canyon walls began to rise on either side of me, the road narrowing as I approached Dead Man's Pass. My hands tightened on the wheel, the familiar knot of tension growing in my chest. The road was winding, dangerous, with steep cliffs on one side and jagged rock on the other. I'd driven it 100 times before, but not since the night Eddie died. As I climbed higher, the truck started to act up. First, it was the brakes. They began to make a grinding noise that sent vibrations up through the cab. They were new, serviced just a week ago, no reason they should be failing. Then the engine sputtered, just once, but enough to make my heart jump. "Come on, Rusty," I muttered to myself. "Just keep moving, 1 mile at a time." But the truck didn't listen. The headlights behind me were still there, never getting any closer, never fading away. Something about it gnawed at me, a slow realization creeping in. I knew that truck. It was Eddie's. It couldn't be. Of course, Eddie's truck was a wreck at the bottom of the canyon, rusted and forgotten. But the make, the model, even the busted left headlight, it was all the same. And it was following me. I turned up the CB, hoping for some noise to drown out my thoughts, but all I got was static. My hands were sweating now, the wheel slick beneath my fingers. The canyon walls seemed to press in tighter as I reached the most dangerous curve, the very spot where Eddie went over the edge. My foot eased off the gas, but then the CB crackled to life, and a voice broke through the static. "Rusty, Hank, you got to stop." I nearly jerked the wheel in shock. I knew that voice. It was impossible, but I knew it. It was Eddie. "Eddie," I whispered, even though I knew there was no way it could be real. I fumbled with the radio, trying to clear the signal, but the voice only grew louder, swallowed by the hiss of static. "Rusty, you gotta stop. You can't make the same mistake." I was losing my mind. That's what this was. Too many years on the road, too many ghosts haunting me. That's all it was. But then the truck sputtered again. The grinding in the brakes got worse. I could feel the whole rig shudder as I tried to slow down, but the brakes weren't responding. I pumped them hard, but nothing. The curve was coming up fast, and I knew I wouldn't make it if the brakes didn't hold. "Damn it," I shouted, yanking the wheel hard to the right, pulling off onto the narrow shoulder. The truck screeched to a stop, just inches from the cliff's edge. For a long time I sat there, heart pounding, staring at the drop below. The canyon stretched out beneath me, a black abyss swallowing the last traces of daylight. My breathing was ragged, my hands shaking, and then I saw it. Eddie's truck was still there, sitting on the road behind me, headlights glowing dimly through the dust. But now, I could see it wasn't just a truck. The rig was mangled, twisted, just like it had been after the accident. The front end was smashed in, the cab crumpled, the windshield shattered, and standing next to it was Eddie. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, but he didn't disappear. He was there, as clear as day. His face was pale, gaunt, eyes hollow, but it was him. He was looking right at me. I stumbled out of the cab, my legs shaking beneath me. I didn't know what I was doing, didn't know what I expected to happen, but I had to get closer. I had to see Eddie. My voice cracked as I took a step toward him. How are you?" He didn't speak, just stared at me with those hollow eyes. Then slowly he raised a hand, pointing down the canyon. I followed his gaze, my heart pounding in my chest. That's when I saw it, the wreckage of his truck lying at the bottom of the canyon, just as it had been all those years ago. "No," I whispered, This can't be real." Eddie's voice echoed in my mind, though his lips didn't move. "You gotta stop, Rusty. You gotta stop running." I fell to my knees, the weight of everything crashing down on me. I had run from this for so long, buried it deep, but now there was no escaping it. Eddie wasn't here for revenge. He wasn't here to haunt me. He was here because I'd never let him go. "I'm sorry," I choked out, tears burning my eyes. "I'm sorry, Eddie. It was my fault. I should have listened. I should have stopped. The wind howled through the canyon, and for a moment, it sounded like Eddie was speaking again. But this time, it wasn't a warning. It was forgiveness. I never blamed you, Rusty. His voice whispered softer now, like it was being carried away by the wind. But you got to forgive yourself. The headlights of Eddie's truck flickered once, then went out. The figure standing beside it began to fade, dissolving into the dust and shadows of the canyon. And then he was gone. I sat there on the edge of the road, staring down into the canyon where my brother's truck had fallen. The air was still, the only sound the soft hum of the desert wind. I didn't know how long I sat there, but when I finally got to my feet, something had shifted inside me. The guilt was still there, but it wasn't crushing me anymore. It wasn't tearing me apart from the inside. I could breathe again. I climbed back into the cab and started the engine. The truck roared to life, and the brakes responded this time, smooth and steady as I pulled back onto the road. I glanced in the rearview mirror one last time. There was nothing there. No truck, no headlights, just empty miles of desert behind me. I smiled a sad, tired smile. It was time to stop running. Time to go home. As I drove through Dead Man's Pass, the echoes of the past faded into the night, leaving only the road ahead. I wasn't afraid of being alone. In fact, I thrived on it. After years of pushing myself filming solo wilderness expeditions and gaining thousands of subscribers, isolation felt like a familiar friend. Devil's Ridge, though, this place was something else. I had scouted it out for weeks, planning my trip down to the smallest detail. The ridge was perfect, remote, rugged, untouched. Hardly any hikers came this far into the Montana wilderness, and the few who did warned of getting lost in the dense forests or disappearing into one of the old crumbling mining tunnels. The place was steeped in eerie local lore, and I loved it. Stories of shadowy figures, night stalkers they called them, spirits of miners who perished in a cave-in over 100 years ago. They supposedly wandered these woods, haunting anyone foolish enough to linger too long. It was exactly the kind of place I could milk for my survival blog. Spooky, remote, and dripping with atmosphere. My audience would eat it up. I parked the RV in a small clearing nestled against a cliffside, setting up camp as the sun dipped below the horizon. The towering pines cast long shadows across the forest floor, and the sound of the wind through the trees was strangely muted. There was no birdsong, no rustling of small animals, just the breeze and the soft creak of old branches swaying. Max, my drone, hovered above the trees, capturing the stunning panoramic views. I had just set it to autopilot to get some shots of the surrounding cliffs when the feed cut out, static flooding my screen. "What the hell?" I muttered, tapping the screen in frustration. I brought the drone back, its footage corrupted with strange, distorted images. Warped figures flickering in and out of focus, standing just at the edge of the tree line. I chalked it up to a malfunction. After all, I was miles from civilization, and the signal could have been weak. But still, a part of me couldn't shake the feeling that the footage was wrong. Shrugging it off, I stored Max for the night and started a fire, settling in for what I hoped would be an uneventful evening. As I recorded my thoughts for the day, I decided to throw in a few words about the local legend, something to spice up the narrative for my viewers. "They call them the Night Stalkers," I said into the camera, my face illuminated by the glow of the flames. "Spirits of miners who died in these hills, lost to the darkness. But I'm not worried, just a bunch of ghost stories, right?" I grinned, more to convince myself than anyone else. The first real sign of trouble came the second night. I was reviewing the footage I had shot earlier in the day when I heard a soft sound outside the RV. At first, I thought it was the wind, just the trees shifting. But then it came again, low and rhythmic, like tapping. Max growled low in his corner, his eyes fixed on the door. I froze, listening. The tapping grew louder, almost insistent, like someone or something was circling the RV, knocking softly against the metal. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I grabbed my flashlight, flicking it on and swinging the beam toward the door. "All right, whoever's out there, you're not scaring me. I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Silence. I stood there holding my breath, waiting for something, anything to happen. After a few long moments, I convinced myself it was just a branch or something scraping against the side of the RV. I'd been on enough solo trips to know how easy it was to get jumpy out here. But Max was still growling, his ears flat against his head. He wasn't convinced. Neither was I, if I'm honest. The next day, I decided to do a bit more exploring. The cliffs were full of old mining tunnels, most of them sealed up decades ago. I found one near the base of the ridge, its entrance boarded up with rotten planks. Curiosity got the better of me, and I pried a few loose, slipping through the narrow gap. The tunnel was dark and smelled like damp earth. My flashlight flickered as I moved deeper inside, casting eerie shadows against the jagged walls. Strange symbols were etched into the rock, crudely drawn, unfamiliar shapes that seemed to spiral in on themselves. I felt a sudden chill, and a soft sound echoed through the tunnel, like footsteps on loose gravel. I froze, shining my light down the passage. Nothing. Still, something about the place felt wrong. I backed out quickly, breathing a sigh of relief as I stepped back into the daylight. As I walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. That night, the tapping returned. This time, it was louder, more deliberate. I sat in the RV, clutching the flashlight in one hand, the other gripping my camera as I recorded the strange noises. The tapping moved around the RV, slow and methodical, almost as if it was circling me. I stood up, heart pounding, and yanked the door open, shining the light into the darkness. Nothing. I stepped outside, my breath fogging in the cold air. The forest was still, but the air felt thick, heavy. I turned slowly, scanning the tree line, and that's when I saw them. Shadows, tall and thin, flitting between the trees. They moved like people, but their forms were indistinct, more like silhouettes than solid shapes. My chest tightened. I swung the flashlight toward the figures, but as soon as the beam touched them, they vanished, swallowed by the darkness. I stood there frozen, my heart hammering in my chest. The wind had picked up, carrying faint whispers, almost like voices calling from the woods. I backed toward the RV, slamming the door shut behind me. The shadows grew bolder after that. No matter where I went, I could feel them watching me, their dark forms flickering just at the edge of my vision. My drone footage showed brief, eerie glimpses of them, dark, human-like shapes moving through the trees, always just out of focus. I tried to leave the ridge, packed up my gear, loaded Max into the RV, and started the engine. But the moment I hit the ignition, the RV stalled. I tried again and again. Nothing. It was as if the ridge itself didn't want me to leave. Panic set in. I wasn't one to lose my cool, but this was something I couldn't explain. I was trapped, and I wasn't alone. On the final night, everything came to a head. I was lying in bed, the RV windows covered, trying to block out the tapping that had returned. Max was huddled in the corner, trembling. The tapping grew louder, more insistent, like something was trying to get in. I sat up, heart racing, and suddenly the RV shook violently, as if something had slammed into the side. I jumped to my feet, grabbing the flashlight, but the beam flickered and died. The whispers outside grew louder, more urgent, filling my head with a cacophony of unintelligible voices. I rushed to the door, flinging it open, only to be met with complete darkness. The fire outside had gone out. The shadows were everywhere now, circling the RV, their forms more defined than ever. Dark, human-like figures with no faces, no features, just endless blackness. They weren't just watching me anymore. They were coming for me. I ran, flashlight flickering back to life as I sprinted into the woods. The shadows followed, flitting between the trees, their whispers filling my ears, growing louder and louder. I didn't know where I was going, just away from the tapping, the whispers, the shadows. But the forest twisted around me, disorienting me, and soon I was lost in a sea of towering pines and jagged rocks. And then I saw it, the entrance to the old mining tunnel, standing open like a gaping mouth. The shadows pressed in closer, their forms flickering at the edges of my vision. And I realized with a sinking feeling that I had nowhere else to go. I stumbled toward the tunnel, the air inside cold and stale. The shadows followed me in, their whispers echoing off the walls. I don't know what I expected to find in there. An escape, maybe, a way out. But as I ventured deeper into the darkness, I realized the truth. There was no escape. The Night Stalkers weren't just spirits, they were part of this place, tied to the land, the tunnels, the shadows. And now, so was I. The last thing I remember before the darkness swallowed me whole was the sound of tapping. So soft, rhythmic, and endless. Days later, when Ranger Hank found my RV, it was empty. My gear was scattered, my camera still rolling, but I was gone. The footage showed brief glimpses of my final moments. Me running into the forest, the shadows close behind, their forms flickering and twisting in the dark. The last frame caught my face, pale and terrified, standing at the entrance of the tunnel. A silhouette stood behind me, tall, thin, and featureless. The Night Stalkers had found me, and I was never leaving Devil's Ridge. The forest had never felt so thick, so claustrophobic. I had been on the road for weeks, traveling up and down the East Coast in my RV, looking for some peace. It was supposed to be a reset, a break from the grind after getting laid off from my tech job. I thought getting away from everything would give me a fresh perspective, but the road had only left me more exhausted. It was like I couldn't find what I was searching for, and I didn't even know what that was anymore. That's how I ended up in Ocala National Forest. It was early fall, and the place was practically deserted. The few tourists had already left, leaving the humid air and endless stretches of swamp and pine all to me. The ranger I passed when I pulled into the park didn't seem to think camping so close to Devil's Eye Spring was a good idea. "There's no one else out there this time of year," he said, leaning into my open window with a cautious smile. "People get lost in that part of the forest, especially near the spring. Strange place. People say it's cursed." Cursed? I didn't believe in any of that. I was here for quiet, not ghost stories. Still, his words stuck with me as I wound down the narrow trail in my RV, finally parking next to the spring. The water was still and black, perfectly round, like the eye of some sleeping giant, with tall cypress trees surrounding it like ancient sentinels. The spot was isolated, just as I wanted. After setting up camp, I sat by the water and tried to take it all in. The only sound was the occasional splash of something in the water. Fish, maybe, or a frog. The heat was oppressive, the kind of sticky warmth that clings to you and makes every movement sluggish. I hadn't realized how worn down I was from weeks of driving, but the moment I sat down, the weight of exhaustion hit me like a brick. It was a heavy kind of tired, the kind that seeps into your bones and makes you want to sleep for days. So that's what I did. I crawled into the RV, lay down on the thin mattress, and passed out. I woke up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat. The RV was stifling, even with the windows cracked, and my head pounded like I'd been hit with a hammer. I sat up, rubbing my temples, trying to shake off the heaviness in my chest. That's when I noticed something strange. The forest outside was completely silent, not even the usual night sounds of crickets or frogs. It was as if the entire world was holding its breath. I tried to brush it off. Maybe it was just the thick humidity dampening the sound. But then, in the stillness, I heard it. A soft whisper, faint and distant. It was impossible to make out the words, but I knew it was there. My pulse quickened. Who else would be out here in the middle of nowhere? I grabbed a flashlight, threw on my boots, and stepped outside. The air was still, and the beam of my light barely cut through the haze hanging over the spring. Nothing. I circled the RV once, shining the light over the trees, half expecting to catch someone watching me from the darkness, but there was no one. Only the trees looming like shadowy figures in the mist. The whisper came again, this time closer. My skin prickled, and I pointed the flashlight in the direction of the sound. As the beam caught the nearest tree, I froze. There, carved into the bark, was an intricate spiral. It was faint, but I could see the markings etched deep into the wood, swirling inward like some ancient symbol. I hadn't noticed it when I arrived, but now it was unmistakable. "What the hell?" I muttered, running my fingers over the grooves. The texture was rough, jagged, fresh. Whoever had carved it had done it recently. But why? A chill crept down my spine, the kind that sticks with you even in the thick Florida heat. I backed away from the tree and went inside the RV, locking the door behind me. The next morning, I tried to shake it off. Maybe it was a prank or some kind of tribal marking that had been there for years. But something still gnawed at the back of my mind. The whisper I'd heard wasn't a figment of my imagination. I was sure of it. When I stepped outside again, my eyes went straight to the tree. The spiral was still there, mocking me with its perfect precision. I walked a few paces around the campsite, scanning the other trees. That's when I saw it. More spirals. Dozens of them. Carved into trees, rocks, even the dirt near the edge of the spring. It was like they had multiplied overnight. I knelt by one of the carvings in the ground, my fingers trembling as I traced the lines. They were everywhere. My pulse quickened as I stood up, stepping back. I hadn't imagined them. They were real, and there were too many to ignore. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe the ranger had mentioned something about Native American tribes that once lived in the area. These carvings could be remnants of some ancient ritual or custom. But the more I looked at them, the more unsettled I became. I grabbed my phone, hoping to research the symbols, but when I turned it on, the screen flickered and died. I checked the time on my watch. It blinked nonsensically, stuck on 12, no matter how many times I reset it. It wouldn't budge. Time was frozen, just like the forest around me. The air felt heavier as the hours passed, like something was pressing down on me. The whisper returned, no longer distant but close, too close. It followed me wherever I went, slipping in and out of the thick, humid air, just out of reach. I could feel it in my bones. Something was watching me. That night, the dream started. I was lying in the RV, the air thick and suffocating, when I felt it. A presence standing over me, its breath hot against my skin. I tried to move, but I was paralyzed. My limbs refused to cooperate. I could feel its eyes on me, burning into my skull. Then came the whisper, low and guttural, words in a language I couldn't understand, but the intent was clear. I was marked. I woke up gasping, my heart pounding, the sheets soaked in sweat. The RV was stifling again, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. My eyes darted to the window, half expecting to see something staring back at me. The markings were spreading. They weren't just outside anymore. They were inside the RV, on the walls, on the floor, even on my skin. I tore off my shirt, running to the small mirror by the sink. There, on my chest, was a spiral, faint but unmistakable. My hands trembled as I traced the lines etched into my flesh. My mind raced. The curse, the ranger's warning, it was all real. The whispers were louder now, relentless. They filled my head, demanding my attention. I stumbled out of the RV, gasping for air, trying to escape the suffocation and presence that had followed me. But no matter how far I ran, the whispers followed. I found myself standing at the edge of Devil's Eye Spring, my chest heaving. The whispers swirled around me. The markings on the trees seemed to glow in the moonlight, pulling me toward the water. My reflection in the still surface was distorted, twisted, as if the thing inside me was staring back. I knew what I had to do. I grabbed a rock, sharp enough to cut, and slashed across the markings on my chest, trying to break the curse. Blood dripped into the water, staining the surface. But the whispers didn't stop. They grew louder, more insistent, as if the forest itself was angry. I fell to my knees, clutching my chest, feeling the burn of the cut mixing with the spiral. I could hear them now. The marked ones, the spirits of those who had come before me, trapped in the same cycle, marked by the same curse. They were waiting for me to join them. I don't remember how I got back to the RV. The next thing I knew, I was driving, the road stretching out in front of me, the forest blurring into the distance. The whispers were gone, but the sense of dread remained, a heavy weight in my chest. I thought I had escaped. I thought the ritual had worked. But when I glanced down at the dashboard, my blood ran cold. There, carved into the plastic, was a small, intricate spiral. I was still marked, and I knew the forest wasn't done with me yet. I came to the Pine Barrens for peace, solitude. I thought that getting away from everything would help, that losing myself in the wilderness would somehow fix what was broken inside of me after my wife Sarah passed. Nothing made sense anymore. My work as a photographer felt pointless. The things I used to care about were gone. Grief had hollowed me out, leaving only a shell of the person I used to be. So, when the offer came to photograph the Barrens for a travel magazine, I didn't hesitate. I packed up my RV, grabbed my camera, and hit the road. The Pine Barrens had always intrigued me with their dense forests and twisted folklore. But I wasn't here for ghost stories. I was here to work, to focus on something other than my own loss, or at least that's what I told myself. It was the second night when I first saw them, the lights. I had spent the day photographing the eerie, quiet beauty of the Barrens. The way the pines stretched up toward the sky like skeletal fingers, the sandy trails winding through dense underbrush. By the time I returned to my RV, the sky was already dark, stars barely visible through the thick canopy above. It was the kind of stillness I had been craving, the perfect backdrop for my long exposure night shots. I set up my camera, aiming toward the trees, capturing the stillness of the forest beneath the stars. As I clicked through the shots, I noticed something strange in the frames. Small, glowing orbs in the distance. At first, I assumed they were fireflies, or maybe even distant lanterns. But these lights were too bright, too concentrated. They hovered just beyond the tree line, flickering in and out of focus as if dancing in the air. I looked up from the camera, squinting into the dark. Nothing. The lights were gone. I frowned, checking the screen again. There they were, clear as day, pale, round orbs glowing softly in the distance, just out of reach. I rubbed my eyes, telling myself it was a trick of the camera, some glitch or reflection I couldn't quite explain. The rational part of my mind dismissed it, but something else, a quiet nagging feeling in the pit of my stomach, told me something wasn't right. I didn't sleep well that night. Even inside the RV, with the doors locked and the curtains drawn, I couldn't shake the feeling that those were still out there, watching. The next morning, I pushed the strange encounter aside and decided to venture deeper into the forest. The Barrens were an endless maze of pine trees and narrow, winding trails, and I wanted to capture the desolation, the beauty of the place. I slung my camera over my shoulder and set off, keeping an eye on my GPS to make sure I didn't get lost. The deeper I went, the more unsettling the forest became. The trees seemed to close in around me, their branches twisting like gnarled hands. The air was thick and heavy, the kind of stillness that felt unnatural. There were no birds, no rustling of leaves, just silence. I tried to ignore the growing sense of unease. I was here to work, not to get spooked by old legends. But as I walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. My compass, which had been working fine all morning, suddenly started spinning erratically. The needle swung wildly in every direction. My phone lost signal, the GPS cutting out entirely. I stopped, staring down at the malfunctioning devices in my hands. I was good with directions, had spent years hiking and camping in places far more remote than this. But now, standing in the heart of the Barrens, I couldn't tell which way I'd come from, and the trees all looked the same. The wind picked up, carrying with it a faint whisper. It was so soft, I wasn't sure I'd even heard it at first. Just the wind, I told myself, trying to shake off the creeping anxiety. I started to walk back toward the RV, retracing my steps as best I could. That's when I heard it again. Whispers, like distant voices carried on the breeze. Back at camp, I felt the full weight of isolation pressing down on me. The whispers from earlier hadn't stopped. If anything, they'd grown louder, clearer. As the day turned into night, I told myself it was nothing, that I was just on edge from being alone out here. But as darkness fell and the oppressive stillness of the forest closed in, I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, expecting to see something lurking in the shadows. I decided to review the photos I'd taken that day, hoping the distraction would calm my nerves. As I scrolled through the images, something caught my eye. The lights. There they were again, hovering just at the edge of the frame, bright and unmistakable. They flickered in the distance, glowing softly against the dark backdrop of the trees. I zoomed in, trying to make sense of what I was seeing, but the closer I looked, the more the lights seemed to blur, as if they were shifting, moving in some unnatural way. I glanced up from the screen, and my heart stopped. The lights weren't just in the photos, they were outside. I rushed to the window, pulling back the curtain, and there, just beyond the trees, I saw them. Pale, glowing orbs floating silently in the darkness. They pulsed gently, like they were beckoning me, drawing me in. I felt a strange pull, an almost physical urge to step outside, to follow the lights into the woods. I told myself it was ridiculous, that I was being irrational, but the more I stared, the stronger the pull became. Before I knew it, I was grabbing my camera and heading for the door. The forest was darker than it should have been. The thick canopy blocked out any trace of moonlight. The lights moved ahead of me, hovering just out of reach, flickering in and out of sight as they led me deeper into the trees. I kept telling myself that I was only following them to figure out what they were, to get the perfect shot for my blog. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the whole truth. There was something else drawing me forward, something I couldn't explain. The deeper I went, the more disoriented I became. The trees seemed to close in around me, twisting and warping, their shapes blurred in the darkness. My footsteps felt heavy, sluggish, like the ground was pulling at me, slowing me down. The lights, however, remained just out of reach, always moving a little farther ahead, urging me to follow. And then I heard it, Sarah's voice. "Nate?" I stopped dead in my tracks, my heart hammering in my chest. "Nate, come back to me." It was her. It had to be. The voice was so soft, so familiar, like the way she used to call me from the other room when she needed help with something. I stood there, frozen, staring at the lights as they pulsed gently, the sound of her voice swirling around me. I wanted to believe it. I wanted to believe she was out there, waiting for me, that somehow she wasn't gone. But something about the voice wasn't right. It was too distant, too hollow, like an echo from a place I couldn't reach. The lights flickered, growing brighter, and I felt the pull again, stronger this time, almost overwhelming. My mind screamed at me to move, to follow, to find her. But something deep in my gut told me not to. "No," I whispered, backing away, shaking my head. "This isn't real." I turned to run, but the forest had changed. The once familiar path was gone, replaced by an endless tangle of trees, all twisted and gnarled, like something out of a nightmare. The lights flared angrily, swirling around me. Now their once soft glow became harsh and blinding. I stumbled, panic rising in my chest as the ground beneath me seemed to shift, pulling me down. The air grew thick and suffocating. The whispers returned, louder now, surrounding me, pressing in from all sides. "Give in. Come with us." I ran blindly through the trees, the lights chasing me, flickering like angry fireflies. The whispers grew louder, their voices overlapping, creating a cacophony of sound that made it impossible to think. I wasn't sure how long I ran. Time seemed to stretch and warp, just like the forest around me. But eventually, I spotted a familiar shape in the distance. The RV. I burst through the trees, collapsing against the side of the RV, gasping for breath. The lights hovered at the edge of the clearing, pulsing angrily, but they didn't follow. I scrambled inside, slamming the door behind me. The lights remained outside, flickering ominously, but they didn't come closer. It was as if something was keeping them at bay, something stronger than whatever force had been pulling me toward them. I slumped to the floor, my body trembling with exhaustion, my mind still reeling from the experience. The whispers had stopped, but the memory of them lingered, echoing in the back of my mind. I had nearly followed them, nearly given in. But whatever those lights were, they weren't Sarah. They never had been. As dawn broke, I didn't wait around to see if the lights would return. I packed up the RV and left the Pine Barrens behind, the forest shrinking in the rearview mirror. But as I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that the lights were still out there, waiting for the next traveler to lose their way. The beckoning lights hadn't gotten me. Not this time. But I knew they wouldn't stop. I had been driving for hours, the Mojave Desert stretching endlessly around me, barren and vast under the relentless sun. The road was long behind me now, just an empty trail of dust leading out to nowhere. Perfect. This was exactly what I needed. A break from work, from the grind, from people. Out here, there was nothing but silence and space. No cell towers, no deadlines, no distractions. Just me and the desert. I pulled the RV to a stop near a rocky outcrop and stepped out. The air was dry and still, the kind of quiet that felt like it was pressing down on you. I took a deep breath, inhaling the warm scent of sand and stone. This was my escape. No buzzing phone, no frantic emails, just the open sky and the endless horizon. I set up camp quickly, parking the RV in the shade of the rock formation and pulling out my gear. I wanted to explore before the light faded. There was something about the desert that always fascinated me, the way the landscape shifted from harsh to beautiful in a matter of hours. But right now, I was focused on one thing: silence. After weeks of being glued to my phone and running from meeting to meeting, the thought of being completely disconnected was a relief. No cell reception out here, no GPS signal, just me and the land. As I unpacked, I heard it. A faint sound, almost too soft to notice. A rhythmic beeping. At first, I thought it was something inside the RV, maybe an alarm or a piece of equipment malfunctioning. But after a quick check of my gear, everything seemed fine. The sound persisted, though, steady and faint, like a pulse just beneath the surface. I stepped outside, trying to pinpoint where it was coming from, but the desert was quiet. The only sound was the faint wind rustling through the rocks. I brushed it off, assuming it was some distant echo of the RV's systems, and finished setting up camp. As the sun began to sink below the horizon, I felt that familiar sense of calm wash over me. This was why I came here, to escape, to let my mind breathe. But that night, the beeping came back. I was sitting by the campfire, watching the flames flicker against the darkening sky, when the sound returned, clearer this time. It was still faint but persistent, a soft, rhythmic pulse, like something distant calling out. I stood, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling creeping up my spine. I wasn't the type to get spooked easily. Logic and reason were my tools, and they had served me well in the world of engineering. But there was something about the sound, something that felt wrong. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped away from the fire into the darkness. The desert stretched out before me, vast and empty. I started walking, following the faint sound. The rhythmic pulse grew louder as I moved away from the RV. For a while, I saw nothing but sand and rock. The beeping seemed to fade, then grow louder again, like it was moving with me, always just out of reach. I kept walking, the beam of my flashlight cutting through the night. But every time I thought I was getting closer, the sound slipped away. Finally, I stopped. My pulse was racing now, my breath coming in short, sharp bursts. The beeping had faded again, leaving me standing alone in the middle of the desert. The silence around me was heavy, almost suffocating. I turned back toward the RV. The fire still glowed faintly in the distance as I walked. The beeping returned, faint but steady, like a distant heartbeat. The next morning, the sound was gone. The desert was still quiet, as if nothing had happened. I told myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me. Isolation could do that. The vast emptiness of the desert, the absence of any familiar sounds, it could mess with your head. I decided to hike further out, hoping to clear my mind. The landscape stretched endlessly in every direction, the sun already beating down on the sand. I grabbed my gear, making sure I had plenty of water, and started walking toward a rocky ridge I had spotted in the distance. Halfway there, I saw him. A man walking toward me from the opposite direction, his figure small against the endless desert. I hadn't expected to see anyone out here. This was a remote area, far off the beaten path. As the figure grew closer, I could make out an older man, his clothes worn and dusty, his face lined and weathered from the sun. "Hey," I called out, raising a hand as we approached each other. The man nodded, his eyes distant, almost vacant. "You camping out here alone?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "Yeah, just me," I said, a little taken aback by his bluntness. "I've been walking for days," he said, his eyes scanning the horizon. "You heard it yet? The signal?" I blinked, unsure if I had heard him right. "The signal?" He nodded, his expression grim. "You'll hear it. Once you hear it, you can't get it out of your head. I've been following it for days. It doesn't stop. A chill ran down my spine. What are you talking about? The man glanced around nervously, as if the desert itself was listening. There's something out here. Something that's been broadcasting for years. It gets inside your head. Starts with the beeping, then it gets louder. You'll see. I stared at him, unsure of what to say. He looked dehydrated, sunburned, like he'd been wandering the desert for days without rest. I offered him some water, but he shook his head and started walking again, heading back the way he came without another word. I stood there, watching him disappear into the distance, his words echoing in my mind. Once you hear it, it doesn't stop. That night, the beeping was louder. I couldn't ignore it anymore. The sound pulsed through the silence, steady and rhythmic, like it was coming from somewhere deep beneath the earth. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, the sound was there, burrowing into my mind. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my gear, flashlight, GPS, water, and set out into the desert. I had to find the source. I had to know what was causing the sound. The desert was pitch black, the sky filled with stars. My flashlight cut through the darkness, the beam dancing across the rocks and sand as I followed the beeping. It was louder now, almost frantic, like it was pulling me towards something. The GPS was acting strange, flickering in and out, as if the signal was being disrupted. But I kept moving, my footsteps crunching in the sand. The beeping grew louder with every step. After what felt like hours, I saw it, a structure half buried in the sand, a bunker or a weather station, long abandoned. The beeping was deafening now, emanating from somewhere inside. I hesitated, standing at the entrance of the bunker. The door was ajar, rusted and creaking in the wind. Everything in me screamed to turn back, to leave and forget about the sound. But I couldn't. The signal was pulling me in. I stepped inside. The air in the bunker was stale, suffocating. My flashlight flickered as I moved through the narrow corridor, the walls lined with rusted equipment and old faded maps. The beeping was louder now, this lock echoing through the metal walls, vibrating in my chest. At the end of the corridor, I found a small room. In the center, there was an old radio tower, its equipment still faintly powered by some unknown source. But that wasn't what caught my attention. On the walls were symbols, strange, intricate markings that looked like they had been carved into the metal. They spiraled outward, converging on the radio tower as if they were feeding into it. In the corner of the room, I found a journal. Its pages were yellowed and brittle. The entries were short, scrawled in frantic handwriting. They talked about the signal, how it started with the beeping, how it got louder, how it never stopped. "It gets inside your head," one entry read. "It's not just a sound, it's alive." As I read, the beeping shifted, turning into a high-pitched screech that pierced through my skull. I dropped the journal, clutching my head as the sound rattled through my brain. It wasn't just a signal. It was something more, something that had been waiting, broadcasting, pulling people in. I had to get out. I stumbled out of the bunker, the sound still ringing in my ears. The desert spun around me. I ran, my legs weak, my mind spinning. The landscape warped, the rocks and sand shifting, as if the desert itself was alive, moving with the signal. When I finally made it back to the RV, I collapsed inside, my head pounding. The beeping was now a constant, dull hum in the back of my mind. I left the desert the next morning, driving as fast as I could. The beeping was still faint, but persistent. I didn't look back. Even now, days later, back in the city, I can still hear it. A faint, rhythmic pulse in the back of my mind. Always there, always calling me back. The signal isn't done with me yet. The road into the Boundary Waters was a frozen ribbon through a sea of snow, the trees standing like silent sentinels under heavy blankets of ice. The RV's heater hummed steadily, but even that couldn't keep the biting cold out. I was deep into the wilderness now, the place I'd picked to spend a week. Just me, the frozen lake, and the stillness of winter. I'd been coming to places like this for years, ever since the accident. The solitude was the only thing that seemed to quiet my mind. This time, I was here to ice fish, maybe snap a few photos for my nature blog, But mostly, I was here to prove to myself that I could still handle it. The cold, the isolation, the memories. I pulled the RV to a stop by a small frozen lake I'd scouted on a map. It was miles away from the nearest town, completely off the grid, just how I liked it. I stepped out into the icy air, my breath fogging in front of me as I took in the sight. The lake was a vast white expanse, the ice thick enough to drive on, stretching out into the distance where the trees disappeared into a blur of white. Perfect. I set up camp quickly, parking the RV near the shoreline and gathering my gear for ice fishing. The cold had a way of creeping into your bones out here, but I didn't mind. I was used to it. I grabbed my auger, trudged out onto the ice, and started drilling a hole. The sound of the blade biting into the ice echoed through the stillness, sharp and harsh against the quiet of the wilderness. Then I heard it, a deep, low rumble that seemed to come from beneath the ice. I paused, the auger still in my hands, and listened. The sound came again, a low, distant vibration like the ice shifting far beneath the surface. I'd heard ice groan before. Anyone who spends enough time in the cold knows the sound of a lake adjusting to the freeze, but this was different. It was deeper, longer, almost like something was moving down there. I brushed it off and kept drilling. By the time the hole was ready, the sun was already dipping below the horizon, casting long shadows across the snow. I set up my fishing gear, lowered the line into the icy water, and settled in to wait. The cold crept in quickly, even through my heavy coat, but I was prepared for it. I'd done this 100 times before, and the routine was comforting, but that sound, the rumble beneath the ice, kept creeping back into my thoughts. As night fell, I lit a small fire near the shore, the flames flickering weakly against the chill. I sat by the fire, staring out at the frozen expanse of the lake. The stars were starting to appear in the clear sky above, bright and distant. Then I saw it. A light faintly flickering and coming from beneath the ice. At first, I thought it was a reflection, maybe the moonlight hitting the ice in just the right way. But as I watched, the light moved slow and steady, as if something was drifting beneath the surface. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, but it was still there, faint and regular, like a lantern swaying beneath the ice. I stood, my heart pounding in my chest, and walked toward the lake. The light seemed to pulse, growing brighter for a moment, then dimming again, always moving, always just out of reach. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a trick of the light or a reflection of something from the sky. But deep down, I knew better. There was no one else out here, no one who could be moving under the ice. The rumble came again, louder this time, vibrating up through the soles of my boots. I took a step back, suddenly feeling exposed out there on the open ice. The wind picked up, howling through the trees, and I turned back toward the RV, my mind racing. The light, the sound, something wasn't right. The next morning, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I went back out onto the lake, determined to make sense of it all. The sun was barely up, and the cold was more biting than ever. As I walked, I glanced back toward the hole I drilled the day before. Something was off. There, by the edge of the hole, was a long, jagged crack running across the ice. The crack hadn't been there yesterday. It snaked out in a jagged line, back as if something had pressed up from below. I knelt down, running my gloved fingers along the crack, feeling the cold seeping through the ice. The surface felt thin, too thin for the middle of winter. Then I noticed something glinting just beneath the ice. I leaned closer, peering into the crack. At first, it looked like a piece of metal, rusted and sharp, lodged beneath the surface. I reached into the cold water, pulling it free. It was old, jagged, like part of a machine, but there was no reason for it to be here. The nearest road was miles away, and there hadn't been any mining or construction in the area for years. The metal was strange, sharp and smooth, like it had been cut clean. As I held the piece in my hand, the rumbling came again, louder now, closer. I stood quickly, scanning the lake. The light was back, faint but steady, moving beneath the ice, closer than before. My pulse quickened, and I felt a cold sweat break out under my coat. Something was down there. Something was moving. I backed away from the crack, my mind racing. The metal, the light, the sound, it all pointed to something beneath the ice. Something unnatural. But what? The stories I had heard over the years about strange things beneath the frozen lakes, about disappearances and creatures buried deep in the ice, came flooding back. I'd always dismissed them as nonsense, campfire stories to scare the newcomers. But now, standing there in the middle of the frozen lake, I wasn't so sure. I needed answers. Later that day, as I was gathering more firewood, I came across an old ice fishing shack near the edge of the lake that looked abandoned. But there were fresh footprints in the snow, leading up to the door. Curious, I approached, knocking lightly before pushing the door open. Inside, I found an older man hunched over a small stove, warming his hands. His face was weathered, his beard streaked with gray, and he looked up at me with tired eyes as I stepped in. "Didn't expect to see anyone out here," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. The man grunted, his eyes narrowing. "Not many come this deep into the wilderness." I hesitated. "I've been hearing strange sounds under the ice, and I saw a light last night, moving beneath the surface. Do you know anything about that?" The man's expression darkened. He turned back to the stove, staring into the flames. "You shouldn't be out on that lake," he said quietly. "There are things beneath the ice, things that shouldn't be disturbed." "What do you mean?" I asked, my heart pounding. The man sighed, rubbing a hand across his face. "There's an old mining operation under that lake, abandoned long ago. They were digging deep, too deep. Some say they woke something up down there. Ever since, strange things have happened. People go missing. The ice breaks when it shouldn't, and that light, it's not the only thing that moves down there." A chill ran down my spine. "What's under there?" The man shook his head. "I don't know, but I've been coming out here for years, and I've seen enough to know when something isn't right. The lake's alive. It's watching you." That night, the light beneath the ice returned, brighter than before, pulsing like a heartbeat. I watched from the RV, my breath fogging up the window, as the rumbling beneath the ice grew louder, more insistent. I knew I couldn't stay. Whatever was beneath the lake, it was waking up. I packed my gear quickly, throwing everything into the RV, but as I started the engine, the ground beneath the RV began to tremble. The rumbling was almost deafening now, vibrating up through the frozen earth. I glanced out toward the lake, and my blood ran cold. The ice was cracking, long fissures spreading out from the center of the lake. And then, in the distance, the surface of the ice exploded upward, a massive shape breaking through. I left the boundary waters behind, but a part of me knows I'll never truly escape it. Some things should stay buried. And whatever's beneath that lake, it's not finished yet.